One of the things that one of the films we haven't referred to yet is Caravaggio, which is clearly different in terms of its production from many of the films we've been referring to today, particularly Super 8s, but also it's a film that quite explicitly focuses on an artist in a particular era. Is it a film that you see as, again, a sort of metaphor for the situation of the artist today and the role of the artist in society and what function he or she should have?
There are very good reasons for Caravaggio in our culture, because obviously our culture was oriented towards Europe until the American commercial culture took over after the war. And so Caravaggio is in a long tradition of the North looking at the South. You can go to Ruskin or D.H. Lawrence, Shelley, Keats, you know, you can go back to Inigo Jones. So in a sense, this was my own throwing down the gauntlet at the American-oriented cinema. And saying, here is a film oriented towards Europe, which has always been the way I've looked. I've never looked towards America for a cinema. There's as vibrant a cinema in Italy or in the Soviet Union as there ever was in Hollywood. And people forget that, so there was that involved in it. I've also always had connections with Italy because I was brought up there as a child, and when it was suggested in 1978 I should make a film of Caravaggio, I knew nothing about him, but I found that actually Caravaggio has actually quite a cinematic life. You could make a good old-fashioned murder story out of it if you wanted to, you know. It could be made into a Hollywood film quite easily. And yet there's something else about Caravaggio which was quite extraordinary, which was a complete reinterpretation of the Christian tradition at that moment, so that he would paint a young girl asleep on a chair with a few jewels on the floor, and it's a portrait of someone, probably a prostitute, and probably was the prostitute called Lena he knew and painted, and then he calls it Mary Magdalene. And so the people who saw these paintings in Rome would see a girl who they would probably actually have recognized on Piazza Navona, because the painting is up in a church around the corner, a prostitute as the Mary Magdalene. And it struck me that and this, of course, scandalized people.
You mean your transformation of the film scandalized?
Well, the actual painting scandalized people at the time, and yet at the same time they realized there was a truth. I mean, what better subject for a Mary Magdalene than a real prostitute? And that's the way it should be. And it's just what we lack. Do you know what I mean? Again, you know, it's something which actually I kept on thinking, gosh, I wonder what would happen if I was to paint a prostitute who everyone knew about and put her up, you know, above the high altarpiece of St. Paul's now. And I realized that Caravaggio's age was in many ways more open than ours was, and that actually, for all our liberalism and everything, that it's an extremely narrow-minded age. And if you were to just step out of this country into another culture, you would find that perhaps the culture we live in is as mad as the Ayatollah, for instance, seems to us in Iran.
So do you see your own role as a filmmaker as being rather similar to that of Caravaggio, putting certain icons above the altar, as it were? That
in a sense, yes. I always felt that my role was to find family within the films, so that we found community within the filmmaking, and that I tried to make a situation where everyone could come together for a few weeks and find something to work on which opened up avenues of different sorts for themselves, and that was the real purpose of filmmaking, was to create community. And this is one of the reasons why it's been difficult for me to join in the commercial or even television-oriented cinema that we live in now, where people are actually sort of employed for jobs. It never struck me as the right way. People should come to things because they want to make them, and there shouldn't be really this hierarchy. I know in the end one's stuck as the director with one's name up there, but that's not actually what happens when we're making the film at all. That's the necessity comes later, because Channel 4 or the BFI says this is a film by, but actually I think it should be more blitzed. I think I probably should appear in some of the films 3 down on the list. That's what it was really about.
So in a way it's the actual process of filmmaking and the response to working with other people that is more of a focus of attention perhaps than the relationship with an audience ultimately.
Yes, of course, it's the only focus, because the audience, because within those people will be many different types of people, and if they come out liking the film, then one can present it to the audience, not just as one's personal view, because all these other people have contributed in one way or another, and so 30 or 40 people would take care of nearly all the audience, because there would be people who would understand any of those people in the audience. I think that's how that's how we always saw these films, as if we all, at the end, if at the end of the film, all the people who make it say, I really enjoyed making that film and I really liked the film, or, you know what I mean, I don't agree with this bit, but on the whole I think it was an enhancing, then the film has worked. And that's what I try and do.
So do you think there are other filmmakers working in Britain who you feel exploring that same sort of attitude, other filmmakers in the past? I mean, do you feel part of a community of filmmakers, or do you feel relatively isolated and independent?
I feel very isolated, although there are filmmakers who I like very much, because mine's only one way of doing it, after all. And, you know, there are other filmmakers who work like this, of course, in what would be called underground alternative cinema, or more experimental cinema. I'm one of the only ones who's actually managed to make the break into what I call larger cinema. I mean, there are a few of us, and there are filmmakers who I like immensely. And Sally Potter, I like very much. Her Gold Diggers and Terence Davis's films, I think, are remarkable for their control and the use of the camera, and you know, a different sense of community, and especially in, I think, It Still Lives, in Terence's new film. It's remarkable, this view of Liverpool life in the 50s. I, of course, came from a service family. We were isolated. You know, we lived behind the barbed wire, and we talked about everyone else's, you know, Civvy Street, or, you know, and so it's a different sort of community.